Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
This story begins with a single murder trial on Central Avenue number 3. And the defendant in that case was a girl named Cassia Victor. The man who was accused of the incident suddenly stood up and started shouting loudly that it was all slander. He defended his rights and said that he had done absolutely nothing of the sort, and also explained that all this was being done so that he would feel the weight of guilt. However, the judge did not like the guy's behavior at all. So, knocking with his gavel, he asked for silence in the courtroom. Then he spoke, saying that Douglas Falfe was accused of committing many serious crimes, and while holding the title of Duke, would be stripped of his title in accordance with the prosecutor's demand. And until the next heir to the duchy is determined, all assets of the Falfe ducal family will be transferred to the state. When the man heard all this, he immediately fell silent. He was very surprised, and said that he could not believe that they would really do this to him. He was silent for a while, trying to process this information in his head, and then he began to shout loudly, saying that he was protesting. He turned to Cassia and asked how this could be understood at all. The man was very indignant then, and asked what she was ready to do in order to simply humiliate him. After that, he suddenly began to smile strangely and said in a gentle voice that she loved him, and was doing this only so that he would never leave her. But then he said that she, as his wife, should think about her husband's condition. The girl at that moment came closer to him and looked only with an icy gaze straight into his eyes. The guy began to doubt the correctness of his actions, and then asked in a trembling voice if he was speaking correctly. He also asked her to think carefully about the whole situation before she actually made a decision. However, Cassia interrupted him with an angry voice, looking him straight in the eyes. She asked who he was even calling his wife. The man was very surprised when he heard this and asked what she was saying, but the girl did not want to listen to him, so she interrupted the man again. Cassia said in a confident voice that she was now a member of the royal family and could calmly order his head to be cut off for such insolence towards her. The dark-haired man who stood aside immediately began to watch the situation closely. He realized that this would not end well, so he decided to intervene. The guy called the guards in a loud voice and then turned his gaze to the man who was the accused. This guy in uniform told the guards to remove the accused from the courtroom because he no longer deserved to be near them. The man who stared at Cassia without taking his eyes off her and could not believe that she really did this to him, even tears began to flow down the guy's cheeks. When it was finally all over, the girl and her two assistants walked out of the courtroom, very pleased with herself. Stretching, she said she was very glad it was finally over, and then they got into the carriage to get as far away from the courtroom as possible. However, at that moment, Cassia suddenly thought about what had happened at all, and realized that she had a feeling as if an incredibly heavy burden that had been there for many years had fallen from her shoulders. In fact, she was abandoned after 3 years of marriage to Douglas, and given how he kept postponing their wedding, it all happened 4 years after she became part of the Duke of Falfe's family. In fact, they first met when she was only 12 years old. She was still small and completely inexperienced in communicating with people. Cassia saw his beautiful features and realized that they had quite quickly captivated her tender, youthful heart. He had golden, soft hair that glistened in the sun's rays and eyes the color of the blue ocean. From head to toe, he was perfection itself in the girl's opinion. However, what captivated her most was the way he looked at her. The man did not take his eyes off her and looked at her as if she was the only girl in his world. They eventually got engaged, and her life was like a fairy tale. Servants looked after her, and there was always a loving man nearby who doted on her. Her heart fluttered every time before meeting him, and she was nervous, as if it were the first time. Even at that time, Douglas was surrounded by many women, but Cassia did not see any problems in their communication. Looking back, the girl now understood perfectly well that she simply did not want to notice anything because she was blinded by her love. And so, a year later, the wedding was about to take place, and they were already receiving many gifts and congratulations in advance. The marriage between the only two ducal families in the empire became a hot topic of discussion throughout the entire country, and everyone knew about their situation. In particular, many noble ladies were crying about the fact that Douglas would soon be ringed and they would not have a single chance to be with him. Thus, Cassia became the bride of one of the most eligible bachelors in the empire, and in her opinion, she had no competitors. Of course, many ladies, and not only, envied her. However, the happiness was as fleeting as her husband's love for her. The rose-colored glasses that Cassia had been wearing for a long time quickly cracked when she experienced married life with him. In reality, Douglas Falfe turned out to be a womanizer, a gambler, and even an alcoholic who paid absolutely no attention to anyone but himself. He was only concerned about his own reputation and how to have more interesting and longer fun. He didn't get involved in anything else. Of course, thoughts of divorce quickly settled in the girl's head. But after her father's death, her family fell apart, and she simply had nowhere to return to. At some point, Cassia's husband's appetites became too big, and she had to work from morning until night so that they had at least some money left to live on. However, the more she worried about their well-being, the more her husband cooled towards her, and one day he did not even hesitate to bring into their marital home his mistress, with whom he had been having fun for a long time. Of course, it goes without saying that for Cassia, the beatings on her hands and all over her body became just part of her harsh reality. At one point, Douglas stated that he was unhappy in his marriage with her, but when she suggested filing for divorce, he was simply furious. The man made her drink some medicine, and in the end, she woke up, already living in the slums. The girl was in the cold season on the street, completely alone and almost without clothes. She was incredibly cold, but she didn't know what to do next, and all because the imperial laws never worked in favor of women and would not have saved her from this situation in which she found herself due to her own stupidity. However, thinking about this at the moment when much time had already passed, Cassia is grateful to fate that she at least remained alive at all. Because otherwise, as Douglas wanted, their divorce could have ended completely differently. Pulling herself together, she managed to find at least some kind of work and even a place to stay. One woman saw her on the street and took her in, so the girl worked hard and saved as much as she could. Thanks to her experience as a mistress of the duchy, Cassia knew how to manage money, and this became her greatest advantage in life in the slums. While receiving her salary, she invested small amounts in different areas, and eventually one of these investments was able to make her rich. Thus, she founded a trading company and began to engage in various businesses, becoming the richest woman in the empire. And Cassia's very little entertainment was that sometimes she received various rumors about her ex's life. The butler regularly came to the girl and told her very sad news for everyone, but of course, she was happy when her ex-husband had failures. One day, the butler said that Duke Falfe's merchant ship had sunk at sea. The girl then only laughed and said that it was simply wonderful news. And the butler continued to tell the story, saying that his friends, who were also guarantors, ran away with the money, and that he also fell into the hands of swindlers. The girl, when she received such news, simply could not contain her joy and laughter. She was always very happy when she heard about the failures of her dear husband. Even when it was raining heavily outside, she imagined how hard it was for him to live, and she was very happy even with such lousy weather. Day after day, Cassia was tormented by the suffering of her husband, Douglas. But eventually, something terrible happened. One day, the maid came to her and said that a man had come to her, but she was so terrified that she could not even say his name. The girl went down and then saw Douglas in front of her, who was standing right in front of her face in the rainy season. The man with tears in his eyes addressed her, saying only her name, and to the girl's surprise, at the very last moment, he crawled right up to her doorstep. She, of course, did not expect such a turn of events, because she had already hoped that they would never cross paths with him again. After looking at her ex-husband for a while, she loudly asked what he was doing at her house and how he found out where she lived. In fact, Douglas Falfe, whom everyone called the lousy Duke behind his back, shamefully crawled to her on his knees, begging for forgiveness. Of course, out of the kindness of her heart, she gave him a second chance, since his repentance turned out to be truly very sincere. So Douglas silently did any work, even the most vile, that Cassia gave him. And after that, he was always the first to come to her aid when the girl was subjected to some injustice or even danger. He also gave up all his addictions, which he was very obsessed with during their married life. And so he stopped looking down on the girl. Now they were equals, at least Cassia thought so. His clear eyes and soft smile made her feel again that unforgettable love for this man. One fine sunny day before the girl was in court, she was sitting in her office and, sorting through papers, she realized that everything had been going very smoothly for her lately. Of course, Cass didn't want to admit it, but Douglas had a small part in the fact that everything worked out. But then suddenly she noticed one very suspicious paper and could not believe it. The girl immediately began to read its contents more carefully. This paper turned out to be a statement of financial transfer, which Douglas somehow signed. Cassia couldn't believe it. She thought it was some kind of mistake, but then she suddenly realized that Douglas was most likely just deceiving her, gaining her trust as much as possible. Then she couldn't believe that it was really true, and that she had once again fallen for his wonderful tricks that always worked. Cassie understood that she had to sort everything out immediately, otherwise she would be left with nothing. So the girl turned to a private law firm, and there she was told that there could be no mistake. All the property belonged to Mr. Douglas. She had been told that this required a complex procedure, from registration to confirmation. So it really wasn't a mistake, and Cassia knew it perfectly well. In this whole situation, the girl turned out to be a complete idiot, because she again decided to trust a man who had once already robbed her blind and left her with nothing. From that moment on, the girl decided that she would never forgive Douglas again, no matter how hard he tried to use his charms and enchantment. She would not fall for it anymore. So when she got home from the law firm, she immediately walked into his office and started screaming, asking what all this meant. The girl gave him the paper, and the man calmly asked why she was so unhappy, and asked if something had happened. Cassia could barely contain her emotions so as not to hit him, and asked how he could still speak so calmly, because she did not understand how he dared to transfer all her property to himself without even notifying her about it. Douglas replied in a calm voice that he did not understand her indignation at all, because he had changed and now had the right to become the head of their family. However, the girl indignantly said that of course she did not forgive him, but only gave him a chance for redemption, and he had absolutely no right to take possession of all her things. Then Douglas's expression suddenly changed. He said in a rough and quiet voice that she was very greedy and had become arrogant only because she had been lucky a few times. He explained that they shared one roof between the two of them, so he logically assumed that they had become one family again, as they had been before. Douglas said that he was indeed the last Duke of the Empire, so he believed that he was entitled to such wealth. But then suddenly someone knocked on their door, and a quiet female voice was heard, which, addressing His Majesty, asked if she could come in. The man was a little surprised that she had managed to come so quickly. But then he turned to Cassia and said that this was Laura, the girl to whom he had decided to lend a helping hand. Then the door opened, and a beautiful young lady entered the room. She immediately looked at Cassia and said that she was very glad to meet her, adding that she had heard a lot about her from the Duke. The girl simply could not believe that this was really happening again. She squeezed the piece of paper in her hand and thought that she could not make this mistake again. Then Cassia, completely out of control of her anger, began to shout at the two of them and told them to leave her house immediately. The girl was beside herself with rage, and turning to the man, asked if he really thought that she would tolerate such behavior. Douglas addressed the girl in a quiet and calm voice and asked her to refrain from such concerts in front of Laura. He also said that, whether she wanted it or not, on paper it all now belonged to him. Seeing her surprised face, he asked if she still hadn't realized the situation she found herself in. Cassia did not remain silent for long. She began to shout at the man again, and said that he did not understand anything at all, and it was not he who was extending a helping hand, but this was his next girl of easy virtue, with whom he would have fun. As for those documents, she said she could challenge what he had done, completely without her knowledge or permission. The girl explained that she had absolutely no intention of being the wife of such an idiot and low person as he was, and would make every effort to break off any ties with him. However, at that moment the girl fell silent, because Douglas, swinging his hand, hit her right on the cheek with his palm. Stretching his hand, Douglas turned to her and asked if she even understood to whom she dared to say such words. The blow was so strong that the girl immediately got scratches on her face, from which blood began to flow. Cassia couldn't even stay on her feet and ended up on the floor. Douglas continued speaking in a low, measured voice. He said that she was addressing these words to the most important person in this house, its immediate master. He reminded her that once her late father had approved their marriage, everything she owned became rightfully his. But Douglas said he was surprised that earning a few million had made her so arrogant, callous, and greedy. He admitted that thanks to Adolf, he was able to forge several documents. But he wouldn't have had to do it if she hadn't been such an idiot who didn't realize the situation from the start. Smiling, he stood over the girl and, hitting her a few more times, said that she was to blame for all her troubles. Cassia did not listen to him, because she could no longer. She was crying and could not believe that she would really die in the house that she had earned with her own hands. The girl desperately fought for a better life, to reach the heights. And if only she could turn back time, then, of course, she would not have fallen for the sweet words of this idiot at the very beginning of their journey. Cassia believed that if she could really go back in time, she would definitely make him answer for everything he had done. She really wanted to get one last chance to be happy and never get involved with this Douglas again, who always let her down. But at that moment she suddenly began to hear her name, with her eyes closed, and thought that perhaps angels had come to take her to heaven. However, the voice became more and more distinct, and although it seemed to her like the voice of an angel, it only irritated her. And suddenly this voice became so loud that Cassia even opened her eyes. She saw Douglas in front of her, who with a furious expression on his face demanded that she apologize to him immediately. When the girl saw Douglas, she couldn't believe it was true, and she understood why she was so irritated by that voice she heard while she was unconscious. But then suddenly Cassia wondered when the man had managed to change his clothes. After all, when she saw him last time, he was wearing completely different clothes. But after that, she looked to the side and saw a girl with red hair next to him. She immediately recognized her, because her name was Catherine, but she did not understand what she was doing next to him. She quickly began to analyze the entire situation that had happened and remembered that it was Laura, not Catherine, who the man had brought to her own house. After that, she looked down at her hand and noticed that the wounds from Douglas's beatings had also somehow disappeared. Suddenly, Cassia couldn't believe what she had assumed. She quickly ran to the mirror, completely ignoring her husband's anger and shouts, and the girl saw her reflection there. Then she immediately smiled happily, despite the fact that she had wounds and bruises all over her face from the beatings from the man. She was so happy only because she really got a second chance as she wanted. She was able to be reborn, and now she was in the past. Of course, Cassia was very pleased to get a second chance. However, she did not understand why the hell a man was beating her like a punching bag again. Even in the past, this idiot beat her to death, and now she is again on the verge of such a state because she had wounds absolutely all over her body. Then suddenly Cassia heard his irritated voice again, asking if she really dared to ignore him. The girl quickly turned her gaze and began to look at him, but Douglas had already ignored this and turned to Edrin. He asked her for forgiveness and said that his wife was terribly rude. After this, he sighed heavily and looked very pained, saying that he wanted to divorce her as soon as possible. Cassia, hearing this, was very surprised, because when she had previously only stuttered about a divorce, he immediately began a huge hysteria, after which he beat her again for the fact that she could even imagine that he would agree to such a thing. Perhaps earlier, she would have been confused by such a direct statement. However, now that she has already lived her life, she knows what she will do. Cassia, smiling, turned to him and immediately asked what was stopping them from doing it right then. The man, when he heard these words, immediately looked at her as if she were an idiot and asked what she was even saying. However, Cassia was not going to back down. She said in a confident voice that if he wanted a divorce so much, then she could agree to it. The girl, also coming closer, said that he says every time that he is unhappy with this marriage and wants to end it so much. And she had never been the mistress of this house, so the girl did not think that there was any point in them continuing this one-sided relationship. But at that moment, Douglas, having listened to her attentively, suddenly began to laugh very loudly. This continued for several minutes. After that, he put his arm around Catherine's waist and said that everything was right because he had found his true love and Catherine would become his new wife. Cassia looked at him with every possible disgust and could not believe that she had to endure this idiot time and time again, despite everything he did. However, she did not despair too much because she still had one trump card up her sleeve, which she would use. So the girl turned to the man and said that she was very happy for them and wished them happiness. The girl also insisted that all they had to do was get divorced, and then they would both be able to have a real wedding. Douglas was very surprised that she agreed to it so easily and asked if she really wanted this. Of course, the girl knew perfectly well that a divorce from her would only bring him trouble. And Cassia believed that if he dared to divorce her, the news would thunder throughout the empire that Douglas had preferred some simpleton to his faithful wife. And for this person who is so concerned about his reputation, something like this is simply unacceptable. However, the girl did not know who would care about this situation. And of course, Catherine would not care. This girl needed this divorce more than anyone else. So she looked at Catherine and hoped that she would start to act somehow for her own happiness. However, at that moment, to Cassia's surprise, something unexpected happened. Something the girl certainly did not expect to see. Catherine was silent for a while, and then suddenly began to cry. Douglas immediately noticed this and tried to calm her down. When Cassia saw this excellent reaction, she thought that the effect was even better than she imagined. So the girl just couldn't help but smile and thought that this was a completely expected move, but it was even much better for her. Catherine continued to cry, but at that moment she suddenly turned pale and began to hold back her vomiting. Cassia immediately understood what was going on and thought that it was just wonderful. So she hoped that everything would continue in the same spirit, and that she would even help her with something. After Catherine managed to hold back her vomiting, she immediately turned to Douglas and said that she had not been feeling well lately. Then Cassia turned to the two of them, but in particular to the girl, and asked in a surprised voice if she had really become pregnant. Douglas, hearing this, was very surprised. He could not even respond to this situation with words and did not scold his wife for such assumptions. But Catherine began to approach the girl closer and said that she still hadn't had her period this month, and this worried her a lot. Cassia immediately turned to her and said that in that case, everything was quite obvious, and also smiling, added that she was incredibly happy for both of them, and therefore they urgently needed to get divorced so that they could get married and start their own family. She said that it was absolutely unacceptable for this child to be born out of wedlock. Douglas had lost his power of speech for quite a long time, so Cassia could speak freely. She turned to her husband and said that now she understood why the conversation about divorce had suddenly come up, and she added that he probably knew about it, but simply did not want to talk about it. However, after these words, Douglas finally couldn't stand it and started shouting at her loudly, asking if she even thought about what she was talking about. He didn't understand how one could be so selfish, especially in such a situation. He stepped forward and, continuing to shout throughout the estate, said that Catherine had no one at all, and if she really was pregnant with his child, then Cassia was obliged to help her in such a situation, and of course, get a divorce. Cassia was incredibly surprised. She couldn't believe that the man was actually trying to make her look like a complete idiot in this situation. However, the man did not answer. He took Catherine by the waist and began to lead her out of the room, saying that she needed to lie down. He also added that he would definitely call a doctor so that he could examine her thoroughly. He also told the girl that if she suddenly needed something in the estate, she should definitely ask Cassia about it. When the girl heard this, she was so surprised that she even opened her mouth. She could not understand why Douglas was saying such a thing. Soon after, Cassia gathered all the servants she worked with and explained the whole situation. She told them about Catherine's pregnancy and said that this was why she was thinking about divorce. The personal maid named Emmy and the head maid Linda were very surprised and could not believe that this was really true. And senior lawyer Roy, who was called in specifically to sort out this situation, asked the lady in surprise if she was absolutely sure about this. He seemed very worried about the lady and said that at that time she had absolutely nothing in her property. Roy explained that even her dress and jewelry, which one would think should belong to her, were registered in his name. The lawyer explained that if her husband objects to the divorce, then most likely the girl will not be able to get anything from the division of property and will be left with absolutely nothing. But Cassia asked in a low voice if she had nothing left when she entered the Duke's family, since she believed that there should have been something. Roy said that it could only be a diamond mine. Unfortunately, most of the resources have already been removed from it, so there's almost nothing left. The girl thought about his words for a while, and then, sighing heavily, replied that it was a memory of her father, so she still didn't want to leave him. Emmy turned to the lady and said that she should not make such a serious decision based on emotions alone. She also added that it did not matter whether Lady Catherine was pregnant or not. Cassia looked at her personal servant in surprise and said in a rough voice that this was indeed a good reason for divorce. At that moment, the girl turned her gaze to the head maid, who waved her head at her, thus telling her that it was better not to get involved in this anymore. Then the lady turned to Roy and said that she knew very well that there were many questions, but she needed at least something. The man said he understood everything, and Cassia asked him to help her get a divorce, no matter what. She is ready for even the most terrible conditions. She sighed heavily and said that she absolutely did not want to live by her husband's orders any longer. She just needed a divorce, that's all. She looked at all three people and said that she understood perfectly well that his request was confusing. However, these people who had gathered in that room were the only ones she could turn to for help. Roy looked at the lady and said that he understood perfectly well. She was incredibly serious. However, perhaps they would have a chance to get a larger share of the alimony. After this, he handed the girl several papers and asked her to pay attention to these documents. Cassia immediately read the title and was beside herself with joy. She realized that with the help of this document, Douglas would have absolutely nothing to object to her. After some time, the man finally called her to him, and the girl was very happy about it. All this because after that conversation, which was supposed to happen very soon, she would finally be able to say goodbye to this scum and idiot forever. Soon the girl approached his office and knocked. Then she heard his voice, which said that she could come in. The girl immediately went inside. When she came closer to his desk, Douglas answered in a rough voice that no trend could do what Cassia had not been able to do for the past 3 years. The girl immediately said that in that case, he absolutely did not need to be married to a woman like her, since she could not even satisfy his needs and requests. Douglas suddenly started shouting loudly at her and asked why she was so heartless. After that, he calmed down a little and asked Cassia why she didn't want to help raise the heir of this house. In fact, he wanted her to do it because Catherine has no relatives who could help her in such a difficult period. She is completely alone. Douglas also told the girl that once the baby was born, they were going to put her name on the certificate. During that time, she was supposed to pretend to be pregnant, and then everything would be fine. Cassia was incredibly surprised. She could not believe that this was how he came up with the idea of having a child out of wedlock. Then she interrupted the man, turned to him, and asked if the mother of this child would agree with his decision. When Douglas said nothing to this, the girl turned to a maid named Linda and asked her to call Lady Catherine immediately. The man immediately objected and asked why she needed to know such a thing. However, Cassia, turning to him, asked if he really didn't understand what decision they were discussing at all. She explained that with such a decision he was dishonoring not only her, but also the mother of his child, who would soon be born. After some time, Catherine burst into their office very angry. She immediately looked at her lover and asked how anyone could understand all this. For a while, the girl tried to bring her breathing back to normal because she was walking very quickly, and when everything calmed down, she pointed towards Cassia and asked why she should be the mother of her own child. But Cassia came closer to her and saw that the girl was crying. She took her hand and asked Lady Catherine to calm down. The girl, with a smile on her face, said that she would never allow such an incident and tyranny, and also asked Catherine to sit down, because it was probably very difficult for her at such a time. Catherine was about to say something, but Cassia, smiling, interrupted her and said that first she wanted to congratulate her properly on her pregnancy. She also explained that she is completely against a child being born out of wedlock, and she believes that a divorce is necessary for the good of their child. After this, the girl turned her gaze to Lady Catherine, who looked very surprised, and asked her what she thought. Catherine was silent for a moment. Then looking down, she said that when she thought that her child would be born without a father, her heart simply broke into small pieces from grief. Douglas, when he heard all this, felt his share of guilt. He immediately lowered his gaze but said nothing. There was complete silence in the office for a while. Then Cassia turned to Linda and asked her to invite Roy to them. The maid immediately said that everything would be done. Catherine was very surprised at this moment. She looked at her lover and in a trembling voice asked if it was true that he would take her as his wife. She was no longer at all sure of it. In fact, even if Catherine had lived in the duchy all this time, for everyone she was an ordinary mistress who did not stand out in any way and was absolutely worthless. And no matter how much Douglas pampered and cherished her, to everyone around her, she was an ordinary girl of easy virtue who threw herself into bed with a married man, forgetting about her pride. Being a real egoist and narcissist, Douglas absolutely did not care about Catherine's position and her physical and moral state in such a situation. As a result, he also doesn't care if the child is born out of wedlock. He is ready to commit fraud just to maintain his situation, without thinking at all about the mother of this very child. By that time, Rick had already come to them and said that Catherine couldn't just remain silent in such a situation. The girl immediately turned to him and asked if he had prepared the divorce papers as she had asked him to. Douglas immediately took and carefully studied these papers. Then he turned to his wife and said that if she put her signatures on these papers, then the divorce would be considered by mutual consent. Cassia reacted calmly to this, since she was already mentally prepared for such an outcome, and said that since she was the reason for the divorce, she could claim part of the property. Then the girl looked at the lawyer who was standing next to her and asked if she would be able to get her dowry back. Rick, who had looked into the matter, immediately said that she could certainly do it. However, she would hardly be able to receive alimony. He said that she had every right to claim the diamond mine, but it was no longer fit for use. When Douglas listened to all this, he was of course very angry, because he had hoped for a completely different outcome of events. Rick said the girl could still lay claim to a share of the wealth that had increased since she became part of the Duke's family. The man, hearing this, was very surprised and asked what it meant, but everyone ignored him. The lawyer looked at the girl and said that part of the wealth would be commensurate with the success of the family business and asked if that would satisfy her. Cassia immediately said that she was quite happy with this, but then Douglas suddenly couldn't stand it anymore that no one was listening to him. He slammed his hand on the table and started shouting loudly. The man, turning to the girl, asked since when she had decided to do something like that. He asked if she had any idea. She had absolutely nothing. She had nowhere to go, and she would simply die if she were completely alone. Cassia was not going to tolerate his shouting at her, so she also raised her voice, stood up from her seat, and said that she would rather die somewhere in a gateway than remain married to him. After this, in a stern voice, she said that since that was all he wanted to tell her, she wanted him to immediately sign these documents. Douglas decided to show at least a little authority, so he said that he would, of course, sign these documents. However, in that case, she would have to leave the house immediately. The girl, of course, did not object. She smiled and said that she was very glad that everything was finally over. She also said that she really hoped that they would never see each other again, because he was a completely unpleasant person. Then she got up from her seat and started to leave. However, Rick asked her to stay a little longer and turned to the gentleman, saying that he was very grateful for the years of work in this mansion. However, in the future he will be forced to give up this wonderful position and put a paper of dismissal on Mr. Douglas's desk. When the man saw this, he got very angry and immediately asked where he was going. Rick replied that all this time he had not been serving him but the mistress. They were about to leave the room when suddenly the doors opened and Emma, who was Cassia's personal servant, ran into the room. Emma also placed the paper on the table for the Duke and said that she would also be leaving with the girl. Then Linda entered the room. Cassia looked at her in surprise, but she did not answer, but only nodded her head in agreement that she would also leave with her. Douglas then got really angry. He started yelling at all his charges and asked what they had thought up all this. Emma started shouting at him and said that Lady Cassia was the only one they wanted to serve in this house, and if she left, then so did they. The girl couldn't believe that they were actually doing this. She felt incredible gratitude to Emma, who started to protect her like this. In fact, Cassia would never have thought that they would follow her. However, she had absolutely nothing. And when they follow her, they literally take a step into the complete unknown. Because of this, the girl even felt guilty, because she simply would not be able to give anything to these people, who would be left, just like her, with nothing. Then Cassia turned to them, lowering her head, and said that she could tell them straight out that things would definitely not be easy for them in advance. But she also vowed that one day everything would definitely change, and they would have everything they wanted. With tears in her eyes, Cassia thanked them all for believing in her and suggested that they leave this place as soon as possible. Soon, Cassia and her servants gathered all their things and set off into the unknown. When the girl got out of the carriage, she realized that now she needed to think everything over carefully and change the plan that she had already managed to implement in her head. Emma immediately followed her out and asked if everything was all right with the lady, because she looked rather sad and very serious. She began to walk around her from different sides and said that Cassia had turned quite pale and asked if something was really bothering her that much. The girl looked at the maid in surprise, but she smiled to reassure her and said that, of course, she was worried about a lot of things. She looked back where Rick was still sitting, looking very scared and upset, and said that now she would have to be responsible not only for herself, but for them too. The man, when he heard these words, immediately came out from behind the carriage and said that if she meant them, then she should not worry about it at all. He said that they made this decision on their own and would also bear great responsibility for it. Cassia was alarmed and said that they had brought so much trouble upon themselves when they decided to follow her. But she also said in a confident voice that they shouldn't worry about it, because even though it would be very difficult for them at first, it certainly wouldn't always be like that. She said that she would definitely show and prove that such a life would not continue for long, and would make absolutely every effort to ensure that it ended as soon as possible. Before going further, the girl turned to her maids and asked them to look after her luggage. They, of course, immediately and happily agreed. But Cassia also turned to Roy and asked him to follow her. The man was a little surprised and immediately asked where she wanted to go. The girl said that it was quite obvious. First, they needed to find a place to live, so they would go looking for it. Soon they went a little further and saw a rather attractive house. Therefore, the girl suggested going there first. As soon as Cassia entered, she immediately saw the girl she was looking for. She was delighted to see that beautiful face. The girl at the reception desk immediately saw the clients, greeted them, and said that she was very glad to see them. But Cassia, without thinking twice, immediately ran up to the woman and called her by name. She took Helen by the hand and was incredibly happy to see her. The girl was very surprised by such behavior of the lady. She immediately asked her for forgiveness and asked if she could help her with anything. Cassia immediately realized that Helen didn't know who she was in this life, so she laughed and said that she wanted to rent an apartment at number 3 Central Avenue. Helen, when she heard about her clear wishes, was very surprised and immediately asked how they knew about this place. But without thinking twice, she began to walk away from them and said that she would immediately find the ledger, so she asked them to wait a little while she did this. Cassia, when she heard about this, was immediately a little upset. She completely forgot that she learned about these apartments only a year after the divorce. Then she even began to worry a little because at this time they might not even be sold. But the girl, without taking her eyes off, carefully watched Helen. However, panic still took hold of her completely, and she thought that the price of these apartments might be too high, and she simply wouldn't be able to afford them. Then suddenly, Helen, tearing herself away from studying her papers, turned to them and asked for forgiveness for the wait. She immediately asked how much the girl was willing to pay for the apartment. Cassia handed her a paper and said that she had divorced her husband that day, and that was all she had left on her hands. The girl was incredibly worried and asked in a quiet voice if this would be enough to pay for the apartment. When the woman saw this, she said with alarm that the client had asked to sell this house as soon as possible for any price offered. However, almost hanging her head down, she said that she could not in good conscience sell this issue like that without telling all the details. So Helen asked her if she knew anything about this house. Cassia said that, of course, she knew everything, and that was why she was asking the girl to sell it to her. In fact, not long ago, a terrible tragedy occurred in that house, which was located at number 3 Central Avenue. The owner decided to commit suicide and took the entire family with him to the grave. In the future, this case will be reviewed, and even other details of this case will be revealed. And when that happens, the price of the house will skyrocket, which is why Cassia was going to buy this room as soon as possible. Soon she and Rick came to this room and put the key in the door. She said that, of course, inside, most likely, it would be a real nightmare. But she said that she would be very pleased to live absolutely free from other people. Rick, looking around at all these walls with cobwebs and terrible worn-out furniture, asked how she even knew about these apartments. Cassia immediately laughed and said that it was a secret that would remain only with her. The man was surprised by her behavior, but did not insist. He also smiled and said that since she wanted it that way, he would not insist or interrogate her. The girl immediately smiled. She was very pleased that Rick completely trusted her and was ready to go on any, even dubious, adventure. However, looking around, she was not very happy, because now this was her home. The atmosphere was gloomy, and it was as if even spirits were flying in the air of this place. She tried to cheer herself up and said that, despite the fact that this house was not so cozy, she already liked everything. Cassia went to the window and immediately removed the curtains from there. She laughed and was glad that now she was one step closer to her wealth. However, at that moment the girl heard someone cough behind her. She immediately turned around to see who it was. These people turned out to be her maids, who finally caught up with the girl. Amy sighed heavily and told her mistress that she had scared them very much. Linda, also looking around, asked the girl why she had bought this particular house, since with her money she could have probably bought something better. Amy didn't give the girl a chance to answer and said, walking forward, that she thought a good cleaning would breathe new life into the place. Roy, heading for the exit, said that in that case he would also put his hand to the transformation of this place and buy everything necessary. Cassia was surprised by his confidence and immediately asked what about the money, since she had none left. But the man, smiling, asked her to let him at least do this. The girl understood perfectly well that Roy did not want to make her blush because of the money, so she took it upon herself. Of course she had no money left, and cleaning this place would have cost a lot of money. So she said that in this case she would return everything later, and even with interest. The man immediately laughed and said that he would definitely fill it out, and then offered to tidy up the house. He went and bought everything he needed. And a lot of time has passed since then, but everything around has finally begun to shine with new colors. When everything was ready, Cassia immediately smiled and said that in a few moments the house had changed beyond recognition. But then, suddenly, Roy handed her a glass of alcohol. Cassia looked at the champagne in surprise and asked where it came from, and most importantly, why they had to spend money on it. Emmy, smiling, also held a glass of alcohol and said that they should celebrate her divorce. Linda put on a very rude voice and said that it was true. She had to solemnly say goodbye to that idiot who didn't appreciate her at all. Cassia was a little surprised that as soon as the servants left the duchy, everyone immediately began to say whatever they wanted. However, after a moment of awkward silence, Roy raised his glass and said that he proposed to drink to the freedom that the girl so deserved. No one objected to this toast, so they all clinked their glasses and, delighted, told Cassia that they should drink already. The next morning, someone suddenly knocked on the girl's door. She was very surprised when she heard this, because she was not expecting anyone at all. Cassia didn't understand who it could be, because she had just started settling in and couldn't exactly invite anyone. Without thinking twice, the girl immediately went to the door and, opening it, asked who was there. She was immediately delighted when she saw the person who came to her. It was Helen. The girl was holding a small bag in her hands, and turning to Cassia, said that she saw that she had already finished cleaning the house, so she decided to come and congratulate her. She handed her the package and said that she had decided to give her a small gift in honor of the beginning of her new life. Helen, smiling, said that it was a mere trifle, and also added that if she didn't like it, she could just throw it away. But the girl didn't even have time to finish speaking, because Cassia, without thinking twice, immediately ran up to her and began to hug her tightly. She began to thank Helen loudly and said that it was all incredibly pleasant for her. In fact, this girl was a very kind soul, and she was ready to help anyone in need. Helen was one of the few who extended a helping hand to her. When Cassia was penniless, it was Helen who found her a small room where she could get back on her feet. Cassia couldn't hold back her tears, and bursting into tears, thought that she was incredibly glad that she had met her then. After that, having calmed down a little, she looked the girl straight in the eyes and said that she would definitely repay her for this. She said, smiling, that if Helen suddenly had a house that was difficult to sell, she could confidently tell her about it, and Cassia would definitely come up with something and help. Helen was a little surprised by this, but soon smiled and thanked her, saying that she would definitely keep it in mind. Cassia was going to succeed with her to live happily. Some time passed from that moment, and Emmy, surprised to see the lady, asked if she was really going somewhere. Cassia said that it was true. They were going to the diamond mine. The man, looking at the lady, immediately smiled and said that she looked as if she was in anticipation. The girl, smiling, said that, of course, she was looking forward to it, because she was finally able to gain freedom and do whatever she wanted. Opening the front doors, she said that she could finally stop thinking about what others would think and how to please her husband and do what she wanted. However, just as she was about to say that she didn't want to spend time with Douglas, she opened the door and saw him right in front of her. The man, seeing her happy expression, immediately said in a quiet voice that she had apparently already begun to enjoy her single life. Cassia said that this was indeed the case, and also became angry and asked how he was able to find her at all, and how he knew where she lived now, since she had not told anyone about it. Douglas replied that he thought that because of their divorce, various rumors would spread, for example, that she had left him for another man. Cassia was very surprised by this assumption and asked why they would think so. Douglas immediately said that, in fact, there is some basis for spreading such rumors, because Roy went straight after her, and this is very suspicious in his opinion. Cassia was very angry at this suggestion, and shouting at her ex-husband, she asked if he had really come to this place just to throw mud at others. She also said that if that was really all he wanted to tell her, then he had better leave immediately, because she was already late. But before Douglas left, she told him that he should worry about his pregnant wife first and foremost, not what other strangers would think and say. However, Douglas said at that moment that everything turned out to be completely different from what she thought, and Catherine was not pregnant at all. But the girl was not going to react to this in any way, because you don't have to be a genius to understand that this was an obvious lie, and Douglas, like an idiot, decided to play a cruel joke. However, before closing the doors, the girl said that their family problems no longer concern her at all. And all because now Douglas's wife is Catherine, and it is she who must worry about all the little things connected with him. So Cassia asked him not to come to her anymore, but to communicate with his beloved wife. Not waiting for an answer from Douglas, she slammed the door very loudly and forcefully right in his face. Emmy immediately apologized to the lady when they were alone, and said that she should have sent him away herself. But the girl calmly replied that it was not her fault at all, because such a stubborn idiot could not be kicked out so easily. After that, she wrote something on a piece of paper and asked Emmy to hang it on the door. When the maid saw the inscription, she was a little surprised. However, she soon understood what it was for, and said that she would definitely do it immediately. And at that very moment, a sign appeared in front of the entrance to Cassia's apartment, stating that entry was only permitted to a select group of people. Roy, who came out to look at this sign, immediately smiled and said that he was even glad that the lady had such a strong willpower. Cassia smiled and said that of course it was, because she certainly wouldn't have thrown herself into Douglas's arms if his mistress hadn't had a child. But then, waving her hand, she asked them to hurry up and leave, since they were already delayed because of this idiot. The man did not object, and soon they arrived at the diamond mines, where Roy told her a very interesting but sad story. Cassia, hearing this, asked in surprise whether he really wanted to say that the diamond mine had completely outlived its usefulness precisely because of Douglas. Roy said that this was indeed the case because the previous Duke, Mr. Douglas's father, was irritated by how much his son was throwing money around, so he restricted access to the duchy's money. As a result, Douglas decided to spend money to satisfy his needs, and he took this money that was mined from these mines. Cassia was very surprised and upset. She could not believe that this idiot had been living on her money all this time. But then suddenly Roy, after a short silence, asked the girl why she decided to take back that mine. He explained that the thing was of no value at all, and that investing in it would be a waste of money. But Cassia said that this was not true at all. Besides diamonds, there was something else very important in this mine. Soon they walked a little forward and were met by the man who guarded the whole place. He saw the lady, was very surprised, and asked why she decided to visit them on this day, and also said hello, of course. Cassia explained that she had come to this place to discuss the future of this mine. The man, when he heard this, was very surprised and said that there were almost no diamonds left in this place, so the mine did not have a very bright future. But the girl, smiling, said that perhaps there were no diamonds in this place, but they were not the only ones that were valuable. She really hoped that there was one thing in this place that interested her, so she said that she would check everything right away. And after some time she brought Roy to a very beautiful place. The man was very surprised because there were quite a lot of precious stones around. He asked how that was even possible, since there shouldn't have been any diamonds left. Douglas was supposed to take everything, but Cassia, smiling, said that these were not diamonds, but simply a precious stone that looked very much like them. She said that he was the one she needed. When Roy heard this, he was very surprised and asked how this was possible. At that moment, a security guard approached them and said that it was an ordinary stone, albeit very similar to a diamond. Cassia smiled and told him not to worry because she knew someone who would appreciate his worth. The man immediately asked who she was talking about because he really didn't understand what was on her mind. But the girl said that in order to check everything thoroughly, they need to go to Exacam. There live real specialists in various things. Soon the girl and Roy went out into the street and approached the coachman, telling him where they needed to go. The man was not at all happy about this and said that he would not go to this god-forsaken place for any amount of money. Cassia began to almost beg him and said that he should just take them to the border and then they could do it themselves. After some time, the man finally agreed and said that they could sit down before he changed his mind. The girl immediately rejoiced and thanked him with all her heart. Then they got into the carriage, and Cassia thought that there was only a little time left until her golden hour. Several hours passed from that moment, and now they finally arrived at the place where the girl asked. The man stopped at the entrance to the city. He said that if they went a little further, they would find themselves in Exakam, but he refused to go further, because this place was truly creepy. Cassia and Roy went out and she said that she begged him to wait for them. The man did not object, because he really needed the money. After that, she turned to Roy and said that it was time for them to go. The man felt a little uneasy, but he had to follow her. Soon they came to a building, and as soon as they entered, immediately asked for forgiveness for the intrusion. Cassia, as soon as she entered, began to look around and told her partner that it was her first time in such a place. He became a little wary and said that, in fact, he was too. But at that moment, a child came out to them. Seeing the strangers, he immediately asked who they were and what they needed. Cassia came closer to him and said that she had come to order a personal assessment. However, the child replied that they were not accepting personal orders at the moment, so he had to refuse. But the girl needed to achieve a result, so she began to insist and asked him to at least take a look. As soon as she handed him the stone, he was very surprised. Having carefully examined the stone, the child wondered if she really wanted to make something specific out of it. The girl said that she wanted to create a product that would highlight the charm of this stone. The child, hearing her clear idea, was very surprised and asked if she was really an entrepreneur, and also inquired if she had many such stones. The girl laughed and immediately said that she had enough. The child thought about this proposal for some time, and then told the girl that if she agreed to work only with him, he would accept her order. Cassia, smiling reservedly, said that she was grateful to him, but in fact she was jumping for joy inside, because this was really a very good opportunity for her. In fact, this girl named Jerry was a real genius who opened her own workshop at the age of 12. 3 years later, at the age of 15, she came across a mineral of amazing beauty, and she began to make various kinds of jewelry from it. This mineral turned out to be a crystal, and the aristocrats were enchanted by its brilliance. Therefore, they took all the jewelry with this beautiful stone with their hands and feet. However, Jerry was still too young and knew nothing about business, so it was Douglas who suggested that she manipulate crystals. Thus, it did not help the poor girl at all, but only worsened her already difficult situation. So in this life, Cassia was not going to let Douglas take such talent and spend it on his own needs, which were completely unimportant. Even though the girl already guessed the outcome, she certainly did not intend to stand aside. So she believed that together with Jerry, she could strike it rich and help this little girl become even better in her business. Soon after, she went outside with Roy to go to the estate, and the man said that now she would be up to her neck in business. Cassia said they would need to draw up a labor contract, hire new workers for the mine, and ensure careful management to prevent any possible leakage of minerals. She also said that they needed to prepare a cooperation agreement with Jerry's workshop. Roy was a little surprised by her decision and wondered if it wouldn't have been easier for them to work with those who had been doing this kind of thing for years, rather than with such a little girl. Cassia, of course, agreed with him, but said that Jerry was a real genius and she was not going to lose sight of her. Moreover, this cooperation will allow her to feed her already large family, and smiling, the girl asked Roy if he understood what she wanted to say. Roy, immediately smiling, said that he could guess, but they would see the final result after some time. But then suddenly their peaceful conversations were interrupted by someone's screams. They heard someone shouting at someone and even calling them names. This voice continued to shout at the man whom he even hit. He said that he always behaved very arrogantly and completely forgot his place. Cassia immediately became interested. She went out into the alley and saw these people who were actually arguing. The young man, when he saw this girl, immediately approached her and said that if she paid, he would make her forget all her sorrows and give her a little love. He said 1 silver coin per minute. When Roy heard this, he was very indignant and asked what he was even saying, because it was very immoral in his opinion. The girl was silent for a while. Then she came closer to him and asked if she understood correctly that if she paid him, he would fall in love with her and make her forget about the bad. The stranger immediately nodded his head in agreement and said that this was indeed the case. Then Cassia asked him if he thought it was too stupid, because with such a strong body, he could have found a better job for himself. But at that moment, Roy turned to him and said that she apparently knew absolutely nothing about the world, because in their time, they wouldn't even take you as a mercenary without a letter of recommendation. The girl sighed heavily, looked at the stranger and asked if this was true or if he simply lacked the ability to be hired for a good and well-paid job. But the man said that this was not so. He was absolutely sure that he was capable of a lot, but he simply did not have the opportunity to prove himself because of the system that operated in their country. After this, he returned to his proposal and asked her if she needed to dispel all the sorrows of life. Kasia immediately waved her hand and said that not at all. She copes with it perfectly well herself. Roy could not even contain his emotions and laughed loudly, of course, covering his mouth. But the man continued to insist on his own. He leaned closer to her and asked her if she would like him to become her bodyguard. The guy also said that for 1 gold piece a week and food and lodging, he would definitely be ready to become one. For him, this was a great opportunity, since he was fired from his previous job with a big scandal. He came closer and closer to her and said that he would even have enough food and a roof over his head, and that he didn't even have to pay money for him to become this bodyguard. Kasia stopped him immediately, because he was close enough, and told him to hold back his ambitions a little, and not even think about what he had proposed from the very beginning. And to begin with, she asked him to at least introduce himself, so that she would know how to address him in general, and only after that would she consider his candidacy. The man suddenly looked very confused and said in a quiet, muffled voice that he did not remember his name. So, unfortunately, he could not answer her this question.